The history of Hello Kitty. There are a handful of cartoon characters that are instantly recognizable: Mickey Mouse, SpongeBob SquarePants, Betty Boop, and of course, Hello Kitty. Created back in the 1970s by the Japanese company Sanrio, the bow-wearing character has since become the face of a billion-dollar franchise, appearing on everything from postcards to plushies to purses. Being many Americans' first introduction to the Japanese concept of kawaii, Hello Kitty's popularity has come in waves, being a must-have Christmas present in the 1980s, a fashion icon in the 2000s, and a music inspiration in the 2010s. In honor of Hello Kitty's 50th birthday, in today's video we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the character's creation, her cultural impact, dozens of her friends, and her current relevance. Let's get into it. In 1960, Japanese entrepreneur Shintaro Tsuji founded the Yamanashi Silk Center in Tokyo, with the textile company initially manufacturing simple silk products like scarves and ties. Tsuji would eventually expand the business to include other goods, including rubber sandals, which were painted with various designs to increase their perceived value and make them more appealing to the masses. He noticed that the sandals with cuter artwork, like flowers and fruits, sold better, with their strawberry collection seeing the most success. And as a result, the company began commissioning independent artists to create other unique designs and patterns. They expanded their product range to include notebooks, greeting cards, and simple accessories, effectively becoming a gift shop, solidifying the company's ethos, small gift, big smile, which reflected the Japanese custom of gift-giving. Tsuji also obtained the Japanese licensing rights to popular foreign characters from that time period, including Snoopy from Peanuts, meaning that if you were a fan of the adorable dog, there was only one place in all of Japan that sold what you were looking for. With the company being better known for their cute drawings instead of their silk products, they made the decision to change their name to Sanrio in 1973. While their products had already begun featuring animal characters, these were still being created by people outside of the company, meaning Sanrio had to pay royalties to use these images. Fed up with the recurring fees, Tsuji decided to change the company's strategy ever so slightly, hiring a team of in-house artists to create a lineup of characters that Sanrio would have sole ownership over. Tsuji did his own market research by showing his son's elementary school classmates pictures of different animals, with the most popular being dogs, followed by cats, then bears. Because of the enduring chokehold Snoopy had over the cartoon character market, Tsuji decided dogs were out. So Sanrio made the choice to test out the other animal options instead. Yuko Shimizu is credited for the creation of the first original Sanrio character in 1973, Koro-chan, a brown bear with croquettes on his cheeks, the inspiration for his name. To amplify this cuteness, he was often paired with a white rabbit known as Little Honey, who was renamed Kathy 2 years later, before having her name changed once again in the late 90s to Daisy. Since her introduction, comparisons were drawn to the Dutch picture book character Miffy, who was created by artist Dick Bruna in 1955, nearly 2 whole decades before Little Honey. Eventually in 2010, Sanrio was sued for allegedly copying Miffy, and all iterations of this rabbit character were subsequently prohibited from use, with contemporary re-releases of any media featuring Kathy being traced over with other Sanrio characters. We're unsure about the popularity of these early characters when they were first released, but what we do know is that in 1974, Sanrio struck gold with the legendary Hello Kitty. Another Yuko Shimizu creation, the character initially had no name and was simply referred to as the White Kitten, but after taking inspiration from Lewis Carroll's 1871 book, Through the Looking Glass, they decided to impart her with the rather literal Kitty name. The hello was added after Shintaro Tsuji stated that he wanted her name to include a greeting for global appeal, and his first choice was actually Hi Kitty, but it didn't stick. The first piece of merchandise to feature the Hello Kitty character was released in March 1975, with the vinyl coin purse retailing for 240 yen, and other products like coffee mugs, tote bags, and bento boxes followed closely behind. Hello Kitty, both as a character and a product, sold incredibly well immediately after her debut, with this popularity coinciding with Sanrio's sales increasing 7-fold. This was largely attributed to Japan's growing economy as a whole, with families having more disposable income that could go towards their children's Sanrio fascination. Because of the brand's popularity amongst the middle class, sanrio appeared aspirational, spurring even greater demand, and the company began making an even wider range of products, including toys and clothing. In 1974, Rocco Maeda created Patty and Jimmy, a pair of best friends that Shintaro Tsuji supposedly hated, as he much preferred Sanrio's animal mascots like Hello Kitty. However, the two sold fairly well regardless, resulting in a handful of other human characters being introduced. This included the Strawberry King in 1975, a concept no doubt inspired by the company's successful strawberry products from years prior. Around Christmas, the company debuted the brother-sister duo known as Little Twin Stars. Created by Yasuko Matsumoto, the pair were initially nameless, but following a survey in an issue of Sanrio's then newly launched Strawberry newspaper, which is still in circulation today, the names Kiki and Lala were chosen by fans. In 1975, Yasuko Matsumoto created My Melody. Initially a Sanrio interpretation of the tale of Little Red Riding Hood, My Melody's hooded appearance was unique enough from the company's previous White Rabbit, Kathy, that she was able to continue on as her own character, ironically eclipsing her predecessor in terms of popularity. The aesthetic that Sanrio became known for in the 1970s was one that had been steadily growing in popularity in Japan over the course of the decade, known as kawaii. Essentially an entire cultural movement, kawaii is an array of traits that, when combined, create something that is considered exceptionally adorable, charming, innocent, and youthful. Visually, this can be accomplished with bubbly letters, sweet shapes like hearts and stars, characters with round baby faces, cuddly animals, and bright colors. You'll note that all of these were prominent motifs in Sanrio's merchandise. At this point in time, Sanrio was primarily marketed towards children and preteens, specifically young girls, something which continued even when the company finally decided to venture outside of Japan. In 1976, they opened their first US store in San Jose, California, and that same year they also began licensing out their characters to other companies, a strategy which proved immensely successful as it helped introduce children across the globe to the brand. In 1978, Sanrio opened a store in Hong Kong, their first in Asia outside of Japan, which was followed by a store in Germany in 1980. And over the course of the decade, several other stores popped up in various countries, with 1,000 eventually opening across the United States. In a few short years, Sanrio had become a status symbol and cultural phenomenon, with the company grossing $30 million in 1981 in the US alone, although Japanese sales were 10 times that. Since 1973, the company had brought characters in and out of rotation depending on their popularity, and as they expanded into foreign markets, they found that there was no universal answer for what audiences would find appealing, resulting in a good deal of trial and error when it came to creating characters. My Melody was one of the most popular characters, as seen in this letter to Santa, written in 1983, and because of her popularity in the US, Sanrio introduced Robbie Rabbit, a character initially created in 1975 that had failed to capture the attention of Japanese consumers. Advertised as a more macho version of My Melody in the hopes of appealing to young boys, Robbie failed to catch on in the States, leading to him once again being shelved, and the character is practically forgotten today. In 1984, Sanrio introduced Mina no Tabo in Japan. The human character saw modest success initially, but in 1986 he exploded in popularity, selling over 1 million postcards, being the focus of a best-selling children's book, and coming in first place 2 years in a row in Sanrio's annual character rankings. In 1984, they also introduced a pink pig named Zashi Kibuta, and the following year a fish named Hangyo Don, both of which were so distinctly Japanese that Sanrio held off on marketing them elsewhere. Although the other characters could be a hit or miss, Hello Kitty was an undeniable worldwide success, even being called the Queen of Sanrio. And in 1983, she was named UNICEF's Children Ambassador, giving her a stamp of approval that no other mascots had at the time. Products that featured her were highly coveted, and she became a frequent presence under Christmas trees and inside school lockers. But that wasn't enough. Sanrio wanted to make her a superstar. Sanrio had already ventured into the film world by starting their own production company in 1977, but these projects were completely unrelated to the rest of their brand identity as they didn't feature any of their recognizable characters. This might seem like a strange decision considering how well their merchandise was selling, but it's important to understand that at the time, the toy-to-TV character pipeline wasn't as common as it is today. American Greetings, the greeting card company, is often attributed for the popularization of that strategy. In the 1970s, they began licensing out their original characters like Holly Hobbie, the Care Bears, and Strawberry Shortcake, which proceeded to spin off into successful toy lines and media franchises. This strategy was replicated by Mattel and Hasbro, who took their pre-existing characters like He-Man and G.I. Joe and started promoting them to kids in the form of cartoons. Seeing this success, Sanrio changed their production strategy to focus on their lineup of popular characters. This began in 1981 with the release of the stop-motion film Kitty and Mimi's New Umbrella, which featured Hello Kitty's oft-forgotten twin sister, Mimi. In 1985, they pivoted to animation with the TV series Buttonnose, named after the character who was created in 1978 by Masayo Hirose. The series wasn't especially popular, but for a first attempt at a full-blown TV show, it wasn't bad. And if you watch it, you'll note that it contains many elements that would come to define Sanrio's future television ventures. They followed up this project with Hello Kitty's Fairy Tale Theater in 1987, which followed Hello Kitty and her friends and family as they recreated an array of stories and movies like The Wizard of Oz, Cinderella, Dracula, The Phantom of the Opera, Pinocchio, Jaws, and even Crocodile Dundee. Each episode began as a play, with the characters introducing the story directly to the audience before it turned into a referential spoof of the source material. Honestly, it was kind of ahead of its time. You'll note that the series often recreated stories that were popular in the West, which was due to the project being a Japanese-American co-production, originally airing in English in the US. Even though the brand was more heavily associated with young girls, Fairy Tale Theater was intended to resonate with all children, resulting in a combination of action-adventure stories as well as classic fairy tales to appeal to a wider demographic. Fairy Tale Theater focused on promoting the Sanrio characters that were most well known in the States, which at the time were Hello Kitty, My Melody, and Tuxedo Sam, a dashing blue penguin. The latter was created in 1979 and was one of the few characters in the Sanrio lineup that had successfully been marketed to boys, hence his inclusion in the 1987 TV show. In the 1980s, the home video market was booming, especially in Japan, and when combined with the immense growth of the anime industry, demand for new content became so great that many production companies pivoted to VHS instead of traditional television or theatrical releases. Although direct-to-video had a negative connotation in the US, in Japan it was the opposite, with OVAs, original video animation, helping many beloved franchises get their start. With Sanrio seeing a slight decline in popularity in Japan in the late 1980s, thanks to the rise of other kawaii characters like Doraemon, they joined the OVA game to prevent themselves from getting beaten on their home turf. Between 1989 and 1994, Sanrio released 80 OVA episodes of their Sanrio animation series, coinciding with the theatrical releases of about a dozen Sanrio Anime Festival anthology films. Formatted in a similar way to Hello Kitty's Fairy Tale Theater, these projects range from adaptations of classic fairy tales to retellings of Japanese fables to entirely original stories. They featured a variety of Sanrio characters as protagonists, no longer focusing solely on Hello Kitty, although admittedly, she wound up appearing in a good deal of them. Mina no Tabo, Patty and Jimmy, My Melody, and Little Twin Stars were some of the pre-existing Sanrio characters to appear, but many of these OVAs were actually used to promote characters who had recently debuted. These newer characters included Pokopon, a raccoon, Peckle, a duck, Keropi, a frog, Batsmaru, a penguin, and Pochako, a dog. Pochako was created in 1989 after Sanrio lost the licensing rights for Snoopy, which explains why the two characters have so much overlap in their designs. You'll also notice that none of these new characters were coded as female, in large part because Sanrio felt as though their male audience was still lacking. Of these characters, Pokopon is easily the least well-known, followed by Peckle, but the other three remain popular today. In 1991, 28 OVA episodes and 2 Sanrio Anime Festival films were dubbed and re-released abroad under the title Hello Kitty and Friends. Just like their merchandise, Sanrio was incredibly selective about which episodes they moved forward with abroad, aiming for global appeal instead of showing off their entire catalog. As such, only Hello Kitty, Keroppi, Peckle, and Pochacco remained as protagonists for Hello Kitty and Friends, with a focus on stories that Western audiences would be familiar with, like Sleeping Beauty, Alice in Wonderland, and Snow White. In December 1990, Sanrio opened Puroland, aka Hello Kitty Land, an indoor theme park located in Tokyo, Japan, which was followed by Harmonyland the following year. Puroland had live performances, shopping outlets, rides, and restaurants centered around Sanrio's popular characters, who appeared as mascots that you could interact with. These projects were intended to rival the Walt Disney Company's popular theme parks, but that did seem rather unlikely considering Puroland wound up operating at a loss for several years. Despite their OVAs proving fairly successful, in the early 90s, Sanrio was struggling, something owed to the financial disappointments of Puroland combined with the Japanese recession. In order to stay afloat, Sanrio directed its attention elsewhere. Instead of solely focusing on children, as they had been for decades, they decided to tap into adults' sense of nostalgia. With the brand first popping off in the 1970s, the children who had once stared at Hello Kitty products in envy through store windows were now in their 20s, with the disposable income needed to fulfill their childhood fantasies. To appeal to this audience, Sanrio began releasing products that were a bit more grown up, like makeup, electronics, jewelry, and household appliances. This strategy worked extremely well, and by the end of the decade, Sanrio was making over $1 billion in revenue annually. Sanrio products were also popular with Western teens at the time, with the brand's kawaii look being seen as kitschy, leaning into the rebelliousness that defined youth counterculture movements of the 1990s. In the US, Hello Kitty, Keroppi, Pochacco, and Peckle were some of the biggest sellers, while other characters like Spotty Dotty the Dalmatian, Pippo the Pig, and Monkichi the Monkey saw small bouts of popularity. This Sanrio revival also happened to coincide with a rise in overall interest in Japanese media in the West, with shows like Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, Inuyasha, and Pokémon becoming sensations. As they entered the 21st century, Sanrio only became more and more popular in the US, with Hello Kitty merchandise being sported by various celebrities including Mariah Carey, Paris Hilton, Tyra Banks, Hilary Duff, and Rihanna. Thanks to the girl power movement of the prior decade, all things pink and pretty were trending in the 2000s. Just look at the popularity of Lisa Frank and Barbie. And with her hairbow and pastel color palette, Hello Kitty was a perfect fit for that aesthetic. Mattel and Sanrio would even join forces on their own doll. Talk about the crossover event of the century. This was also when they began to partner with McDonald's on Hello Kitty Happy Meal toys, which were not only sought after by the brand's adult fans, but helped introduce an entirely new generation of kids to the characters. In the early 2000s, 3 separate Sanrio animated series aired: Hello Kitty's Paradise, Growing Up with Hello Kitty, and Hello Kitty's Animation Theater. Hello Kitty's Paradise followed the adventures of Hello Kitty and Mimi, with the two learning how to bake cookies, take the train, and do their chores. As the name suggests, Growing Up Hello Kitty had a similar educational premise, and honestly, the two series were interchangeable with one another. Hello Kitty's Animation Theater was reminiscent of the Sanrio animation series from the prior decade, having different characters featured as the protagonist of an iconic fairy tale. Besides the usual lineup that included Hello Kitty, Pochacco, My Melody, and Keroppi, the series also featured a few other characters introduced in the 90s like Koro Koro Kuririn and Pom Pom Purin. Sheesh, those names are a doozy. Despite finding success abroad, Hello Kitty was losing ground back home. Her popularity in Japan had peaked in the 1990s, being the top-grossing character in the entire country. But in 2002, her reign came to an end when she slid behind Anpanman and Pikachu. San-X, a Japanese stationery company with its own character lineup, was also cited as a threat to Hello Kitty, with their 2003 release, Rilakkuma, climbing up the Japanese popularity charts. Industry analysts cited Hello Kitty's personality and backstory as the reason behind this shift, with fans finding her less compelling than other characters on the market. Not to mention that after 30 years, people were just getting tired of her face. In response to Hello Kitty's decline in popularity, Sanrio released several characters over the course of the 2000s that they hoped could pick up the slack. In 2001, they released Usahana, a colorful rabbit, and Pandapple, a panda, the following year. Both characters were considered flops due to their poor sales, not the response that Sanrio was looking for. But in 2002, Cinnamoroll came to the rescue. Designed by Miyuki Okumura, Cinnamoroll quickly became one of Sanrio's most popular characters, accounting for 25% of the company's sales in 2004. And in 2005, they moved forward with a manga, Fluffy Fluffy Cinnamoroll, followed by a movie in 2007. Several secondary characters were created to accompany Cinnamoroll: chiffon, mocha, milk, cappuccino, and espresso. While these characters appeared on merchandise and in media, they're not considered part of Sanrio's main character lineup. And I didn't even realize it until I was researching for this video, but did you know Cinnamoroll is a dog? Please tell me I'm not the only one who didn't make that connection. In 2004, they introduced Charmy Kitty, who was advertised as Hello Kitty's pet, with the two sharing a similar appearance, although Charmy was more of a traditional cat. With an emphasis on fashion, the character was aimed at the brand's growing teenage audience, and wound up ranking second in terms of popularity for 3 years in a row following her release. In 2004, Hello Kitty Stump Village was released in South Korea. Sanrio's second stop-motion project after 1981's Kitty and Mimi's New Umbrella, the series followed a tight-knit group of characters living in Stump Village, with the main cast consisting of Batsmaru, Cinnamoroll, My Melody, Pom Pom Purin, and Hello Kitty. The short-lived series proved how much things had changed in a decade, with audiences being drawn to an entirely different batch of characters than they had previously. In 2005, the anime series Onegai My Melody began airing, and featured characters from Sanrio's lineup and original characters created exclusively for the show. The series differed from prior Sanrio projects in an assortment of ways, most notable being its inclusion of actual humans. One of the characters created for the series was Kuromi, the rival of Sanrio's pre-existing character, My Melody. Kuromi similarly dons a hood, which gives her a distinctive appearance, one that just so happens to correspond with her devilish personality. Following her appearance in the anime, Kuromi was eventually added to the main Sanrio lineup, where she proceeded to become my favorite character. While My Melody and Kuromi are still sold separately, oftentimes they're paired up, with their contradictory personalities and appearances amplifying their kawaii factor. And following the introduction of Kuromi, My Melody saw her highest sales since the 1980s, eventually becoming Sanrio's second most profitable character after Hello Kitty. Inspired by the popularity of Onegai My Melody, Sanrio continued with this anime format, releasing Sugar Bunnies in 2007, which featured twin rabbit characters Shirousa and Kurousa, who had debuted back in 2004. At the same time, Hello Kitty, The Fantasy of the Apple Forest was airing, which featured Kuropi, Usahana, Hello Kitty, and Mimi as its main cast. To reflect the changing times, in 2007, Sanrio went in an edgier direction, introducing Berry and Cherry to the Cinnamoroll universe, whose devilish personalities and appearance were inspired by Kuromi. This continued in 2009 with Yoshi Kitty, a cat character reminiscent of Hello Kitty, but dressed in a dramatic style similar to Visual Kei musician Yoshiki. This change was rather short-lived, however, and they returned to their usual cute and cuddly characters with Wish Me Mel in 2010 and Bon Bon Ribbon in 2012. Back in the 1970s, Sanrio's direction was inspired by the growing kawaii culture, but in the 2010s, they were inspired by a different trend: food. Japan's pop culture scene already had a long-standing relationship with food, but thanks to the rise of social media platforms like Instagram, it became a lot more common worldwide to see people talk about and post photos of food. This trickled down into other aspects of pop culture, with bacon, sushi, donuts, and avocados appearing everywhere. Irony was also a big selling point back then. Case in point, all of the mustaches. And this sort of quirky hipster effect impacted Sanrio's designs during this period. First was Ichigo Man in 2011, Hello Kitty's superhero alter ego. An ode to the company's early strawberries and the iconic Japanese character Astro Boy, Ichigo Man was created in the hopes of reaching a male demographic. The release of the character also happened to coincide with the popularity of the MCU. But that superhero momentum wasn't enough, and Ichigo Man hasn't even come close to cracking the top 20 in rankings. Continuing the era's quirkiness, but with more of an emphasis on food, in 2013 they released Gudetama, a lazy and exhausted egg, and Kirimi-chan, a piece of salmon who just wants to get eaten. Although Kurimi-chan was initially more popular, Gudetama has since taken over, becoming Sanrio's third most profitable character. Originally intended to appeal to children, Gudetama saw surprising success with millennials, with his personality seemingly embodying the feelings many young people experienced as they entered the workforce. Besides being featured prominently in Sanrio merchandise, Gudetama has also jump-started real-life food trends, with restaurants around the world serving dishes inspired by the character. He's also found success in the TV space, appearing in over 1,200 shorts between 2014 and 2020, and starring in a Netflix live-action series in 2022 called Gudetama: An Excellent Adventure. With their most successful characters of the 21st century being relatable instead of role models, allowing them to appeal to young adults instead of children, Sanrio decided to continue in that direction with 2015's Aggressive Retsuko. A 25-year-old red panda, Agretsuko is depicted as an administrative assistant who lets out her frustrations about her job by singing death metal at a karaoke bar. If you know anything about corporate culture in Japan, you'll know why the character was such a hit with salary workers. In 2016, a series of shorts were released which explored Agretsuko's daily life, specifically her workplace struggles and her interactions with her coworkers. And in 2018, the concept was picked up by Netflix, who developed it into an anime series that lasted for 5 seasons. Although Sanrio had been a staple in the West during the 90s and 2000s, in the 2010s, they weren't as big of a talking point, and on the rare occasions they were mentioned, it was typically in one of 2 ways. The first was an acknowledgement of their impact on American culture, with Hello Kitty often being reinterpreted as a fashion icon, something that could be seen in the 18th season of America's Next Top Model, which aired in 2012, as well as the 7th season of RuPaul's Drag Race in 2015. The second form of acknowledgement was a little less positive, with Sanrio products being associated with weebs, a person obsessed with Japanese culture, to the point that their behavior is considered obnoxious or ignorant. The weeb phenomenon was satirized on the recurring SNL skit J-Pop America Fun Time Now, with the white characters unknowingly exhibiting racism and cultural appropriation through their love of Japan. Speaking of cultural appropriation, musician Avril Lavigne was heavily criticized in 2014 following the release of her song Hello Kitty, which featured Japanese phrases, references to kawaii culture, and J-pop beats. Although there was a good deal of backlash from Western critics, in Japan the song was received favorably, with many saying that they interpreted it as appreciation instead of appropriation. Because of YouTube and other digital platforms, children were watching less and less TV and spending more time on the internet, leading many brands to pivot their content strategy. In 2016, Sanrio released the 2D web series The World of Hello Kitty in Latin America, which featured appearances from characters like Batsmaru and Choco Cat. This was the first of many web shows, with Let's Learn Together in 2017, Hello Kitty Channel in 2018, and Hello Kitty and Friends Super Cute Adventures in 2020. It wasn't until 2022 that we finally got a traditional TV series again, with Hello Kitty Superstyle streaming on Amazon Kids. This was the company's first 3D animated project since The Adventures of Hello Kitty and Friends back in 2008, and funnily enough, Carly Rae Jepsen actually sang the theme song. As we've mentioned, Sanrio has been licensing out their characters since the 1970s, but in the 2010s and into the 2020s, they began gravitating towards brands with greater name recognition. On the high fashion side of things, Sanrio collaborated with Jimmy Paul, Balenciaga, and Leaf Sia in 2019, Blue Marine in 2021, GCDS in 2022, and Soulland in 2023. More accessible crossovers included Puma in 2018, Nike in 2022, Forever 21 in 2023, and Crocs in 2024. Now, I personally think they need to rein it in a bit, as the sheer quantity of these collaborations leave them feeling kinda half-assed. And as any industry insider will guarantee, the easiest way to kill a brand is by pummeling audiences over the head with it. With 2000s trends making a major comeback in recent years, Sanrio has had a resurgence of popularity with American Gen Zers, with the brand's sweet look complementing both the Y2K revival and the coquette aesthetic. Just like Barbie, Monster High, and Sylvanian Family, the Sanrio fandom has a thriving community of collectors, with people showing off their favorite characters, rarest items, and weirdest finds online. A few celebrities like Dua Lipa and Saweetie have worn sanrio merch in the 2020s, but it's nowhere near the amount of endorsement we saw in the 2000s. That could be both a good and bad sign. On one hand, it doesn't feel like we're getting Hello Kitty shoved down our throats. But on the other hand, does it signify that most people don't really think she's cool anymore? Hello Kitty is obviously an icon, but I can understand why in the last few years she's slipped in the rankings, routinely being beaten out by the likes of Cinnamoroll, Pom Pom Purin, Kuromi, My Melody, and Pochacco. She just feels kind of basic, especially when compared to some of Sanrio's newer releases. Maybe it's time for a makeover. Although we've discussed dozens of characters in this video, that barely scratches the surface of Sanrio's lineup, with the company having created over 500 characters in the last 50 years. But the real question is, which is your favorite? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!